Добрый день, глубокого.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear guests. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of Thesis by Rashitova and Sergeevna for the degree of Candidate of Psychology. Specialty 190010, Correctional Psychology, on the theme, the I image in the world of Maladapted Adolescence, by the author of St. Petersburg University, dated the 9th of July 2020, 6573/1, me, Zishurinska Oksana Vladimirovna, Doctor of Psychology, Associate Professor of the Department of Pedagogy and Pedagogical Psychology at St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Other members of the Dissertation Council were appointed by the same order. Let me introduce them to you. Kostromina Svetlana Nikolaevna, Doctor of Psychology, Professor, Head of the Department of Personality Psychology of St. Petersburg University. Miklayeva Anastasia Vladimirovna, Doctor of Psychology, Professor of the Department of Human Psychology of Kherson State Pedagogical University. In the remote access mode, we have Matasov Yuri Timofeyevich, Doctor of Psychology, Professor of the Department of Oligophrenia Pedagogy of Kherson State Pedagogical University of Russia. Yuri Timofeyevich. Marishuk Ludmila Vladimirovna, Doctor of Psychology, Professor of the Department of General and Organizational Psychology of Maxim Tank, Belarusian State University, Belarus. Dear colleagues, working in the remote access mode, can you hear us? Ludmila Vladimirovna? Yes, I'm fine, thank you. The degree applicant is also present, Rashitova Liliya Sergeevna. Also, the academic advisor, Posokova Svetlana Timofeyevna, Doctor of Psychology, Professor, Department of Educational Psychology and Pedagogy of St. Petersburg University, is present. To improve communication, dear council members working in the remote access mode, to switch off your microphones, but please remember to switch them on when you're given the floor. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English or from English into Russian. During the live broadcast of the Dissertation Council session, an email address is currently displayed at which all the listeners can express their opinions and send questions to the degree applicant online regarding her thesis and the ongoing discussion of her speech. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support department, and I shall read them during the discussion. Questions should be related to the applicant's speech and the content of her thesis, and it's mandatory to indicate name, position, and place of employment of the author of the question. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion of the thesis, to the text and assessment of the thesis, shall not be presented. In accordance with the order awarding the degree of Candidate of Science and Doctor of Science at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, a session of the Decision Council is considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved composition of the council are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members. All 5 persons are present, including 2 members of the council in the remote interactive mode. All the members of the Decision Council have audio-visual contact. Thus, we have the quorum. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's session with the approximate duration of 2 hours. First, the chairman's summary report on the main content of documents submitted by the degree applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations. Answers to possible questions, approximately 5 minutes. 2. A brief presentation by the degree applicant outlining the key points of her study. approximately 15 minutes. Questions to the degree applicant strictly on her report, no more than 2 minutes per question. 4. Answers of the applicant, maximum 5 minutes for all questions. 5. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn with their assessment of the thesis and speech of the applicant with summary of their opinions, questions and suggestions to the applicant, no more than 10 minutes for each speaker. 6. Speech of the chairman and her review, approximately 10 minutes. 7. Answers of the applicant to questions and remarks made by members of the Dissertation Council, no more than 20 minutes. 8. Open discussion, speeches at request of those present with a summary of their positions and or specific questions and proposals to the author strictly on the theme of her study, no more than 2 minutes for each speaker. At that, all the speakers are kindly requested to register in the registration sheet and to fully introduce themselves before speaking. 9. Presentation of questions to the applicant which came in the course of discussion of her speech and the scientific discussion during the broadcast of the council session at St. Petersburg University website. 10. Final answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes for each question. 11. Speech of the applicant's academic advisor, no more than 3 minutes, please. 12. Discussion by members of the Decision Council before open voting the results of the defense, during which the broadcast sound shall be switched off, or we shall discuss how to handle this. Open individual voting. The chairman of the Decision Council shall count the votes and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. 14. A decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree to the applicant. And 15. Closing remarks of the applicant. Have not more than 2 minutes for this. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or objections to this procedure? If there are no questions, let me start running the procedure, but before that, I kindly request everyone to switch off your mobile phone. Thank you for your understanding. Let us start the session. Chairman's summary report. The thesis by Rashitova Liliya of the degree of Candidate Psychology, Specialty 190010. Correction Psychology, on the theme Image of I in the Picture of the World of Maladapted Adolescents, was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary on the 9th of July 2020, order number 6570/1. Rashitova Liliya wrote her thesis at St. Petersburg University under the guidance of Doctor of Psychology, Professor of the Department of Psychology of Education and Pedagogy, St. Petersburg University, Posokova Svetlana Timofeevna. Number of publications of the degree applicant which set forth the main results of her research is 10. In peer-reviewed scientific publications from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of Russia, 3 publications in journals indexed in the scientific databases, Web of Science and Scopus, no publications. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full package of documents for acceptance, for consideration and defense. All documents correspond to Article 12 of Section 3 of the order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the Office of the Decision Council Activity Support Department, who's currently present at the session. Before I give the floor to the degree applicant, do you, dear council members, have any questions, or any general questions to the degree applicant? And is it necessary to disclose and discuss the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? No. Thank you, colleagues. There are no questions. Then let us give the floor to the degree applicant for her summary report. You have, Liliya Sergeevna, you have approximately 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear Oksana Vladimirovna, and let me introduce to you my presentation on study. the image of I in the picture world of maladapted adolescents. Recently, correctional psychology expands the scope of its research, focusing on the process of correction and prevention. Analysis have studied by Vlasova, Lebedynsky, Shepitsina, Isaev, Mamachuk, Sorokin, and Kolosova. Analysis of domestic and foreign studies revealed several basic semantic aspects of maladaptation. This adaptation is understood as a sign of this ontogenesis. In our study, maladaptation is understood as a violation of the social interaction of an individual due to difficulties in disclosing oneself within its requirement of the social, cultural situation as deviating behavior from generally accepted norms. Objective criteria of maladapted behavior in our study are shown in this slide. Let me not read them out. These criteria are typical and revealed also in the studies of Shepitsina, Malkova, Naumova, Zemanovskaya, Shura, Chinika. We have combined the criteria into 4 categories of de-adaptation: abnormal behavior, aggression, social and offenses. At present, there is a contradiction between the observed wide range of disadapted behavior adolescents and prevalence of external factors such as social conditions and family in its explanation. The role of internal factors is not sufficiently taken into account. We believe that the picture of the world can be an important internal factor in this phenomenon. The image of I is of fundamental importance. In modern correction psychology, there is a clear lack of research into the picture of the world as an internal factor. Another contradiction is between the study of the image of I, mainly its content, adequacy to social norms, although the regulation of adaptive behavior requires expanding the functions of the image in the internal system of ideas about the reality. These contradictions determine the problem of the research, which consists of finding a relation between maladaptation, the image of I, and the picture of the teenage world. In this connection, a special study was conducted to reveal the content of structural features of the I image, pictures of the world, and the direction of their integration in the course of maladapted behavior of adolescents. The object and subject of the study are shown in this slide. Let them not be read out. As we proceeded, we assumed that the image of I is integrated into the picture of the world, and the degree and vector of these such integrations are related to the features of their maladaptive behavior. Also, we assumed that the world is phenomenological, reflexive, and social components, and determine the subjective side of experience of maladapted behavior. Tasks are shown in this slide. Let me not read them. While organizing our study and interpreting the results, we relied on the modern concepts of adaptation and de-adaptation, regulation of this ontogenesis, psychological concepts that picture as integral characteristics of the subject, basic provisions of the theory of relations, humanist approach in studying the image of I, the concept of self-consciousness as a new formation of adolescence, organizational principles of comparative research described by Anania. Based on the analysis of domestic and foreign studies, a hypothetical model of the impact of the world picture on the behavior of adolescents was developed, which determined organization of the study and development of the methodological complex. The model and methods are shown in these slides. The methodical complex included techniques to determine the features of maladaptation, the picture of the world, and the image of I. Let me not name them. I beg your pardon. Participants of the study are shown in this slide. It was a group of maladapted teenagers who were in a difficult life situation in a rehabilitation center. According to observation of educators and psychologists of the center, they were distinguished by pronounced maladapted, a group of adapted teenagers. These were teenagers living in families and studying general schools, a group of experts, a group for a pilot study. The work considered experienced and observed indicators of maladaptation, such as self-assessment. And it turned out the compared groups of adolescents assessed themselves as adapted. No differences in the level of adaptation were revealed. Objectively observed indicators shown in this slide were diagnosed by teachers on the individual profile of maladapted behavior. They are characteristic of both groups and express the teenagers' desire for maturity and autonomy, which are associated with the actions and bad habits. However, the group of maladapted teenagers, Brown, the diagram, was characterized by greater severity of all signs of deviant behavior. Let me proceed to the basic provisions for defense. One of the provisions is the content and structure of the image of I is a key component, a reflexive component. The picture of the world of maladapted and adapted adolescents have common and specific features. The image of I, of teenagers in both groups, is represented by the same characteristics: communicative, material, physical, and perspective boundaries of identity. Insufficient differentiation of the I image. The vision of positive personal qualities, sexual identity, demonstrativeness, orientation towards social activity. These maladapted adolescents are characterized by moderate reflexive activity, overestimated self-esteem, egocentric focus, and a sense of need. The structure of the I image in these teenagers is fragmented and represented by separate links of the significance of their personality for others, their self-relationship and their inclusion in social environment. The most integrated indicator is attractiveness, number 21, which speaks about the need of these teenagers to be accepted by others, as well as the need for self-esteem and disclosure of their individuality. The adapted teenagers were characterized by a high level of reflective activity. The image of I reflects the importance of self-image in the present. The structure of the self-image forms interrelated self-image where acceptance plays a leading role. The results of this study of the picture of the world define the second proposition to be predicted. The picture of the world as a system of personality perceptions of the surrounding reality and of oneself is reflected in the interrelationship of reflexive, phenomenological, personality, senseful, social component, and has features that are common in specific in maladapted and adapted adolescents. The phenomenological, personal, and social components in the picture of the world of maladapted and adapted adolescents have identical content. However, the groups differ in the severity of the components. We see the greatest difference in the phenomenological component, which is expressed in the low value of elements of society, culture, environment, nature, and material well-being for the maladapted teenagers. Specificity of the personality and component of the picture of the world is expressing the fact that maladapted teenagers, despite their attitude, close themselves off from it. They tend to perceive the world in a syncretic way, uniting its diverse meanings as a single whole. The social component of the picture of world maladapted adolescence reflects the importance of the needs in interpersonal interaction. The differences between teenagers are minimal and are expressed in the fact that maladapted teenagers are more inclined to understand what's going on around them. The structure of the world of maladapted adolescence is determined mainly by the objects of phenomenological and social components. Such features as habitat, number 9, nature 2, and interpersonal interaction, number 3, are most integrated. These suggest the value of the external environment without sufficient reflection, integration of oneself into the world. The picture of the world of adapted teenagers is characterized by high integration, in which the importance of technology plays a systemic role. Availability of technology is combined with the perception of the world as less negative and at the same time less constructive. Perhaps in the minds of teenagers, the possession of technical means has a positive meaning and raises their status in a group. Thus, the second provision about the presence of general specific features of the world picture has been proved. The next provision is that the image of I fit into the picture of the world of both maladapted and adapted adolescents. Integration of I into the picture of the world of maladapted adolescents is based on the importance of the need for others to accept it and the material well-being. Integration of the self-image into the picture of the world of adapted teenagers is based on the importance of self-representation. The groups of maladapted and adapted teenagers lack a single integrated system of self-image and the worldview. The relationship between the positive self-presentation and phenomenological and social components of the world picture prevail. These adapted teenagers are distinguished by a more pronounced integration of the self-image and the picture of the world. The dominant position in the integration is occupied by the idea about themselves as a very desirable personalities, who are valued and accepted by others. Separate characteristics of the I image are integrated into the picture of the world mainly through relationship with its material components. In the group of adapted teenagers, the greatest role in integration belongs to the demonstrative self, which is manifested mainly through the phenomenological component of the picture. The degree of integration of indicators of phenomenological and social components of the world and image is low. There is no system for an indicator. The last proposition refers to the ratio of the image of I, the picture of the world, and maladaptation. Maladaptation on earth is a complex, multidimensional phenomenon that reflects the mismatch between subjective experience, sense of adaptation, and outwardly manifested maladapted behavior in the form of substandard actions, asocial self-aggression, delinquency. In the group of maladapted adolescents, individual elements of all components of the world picture determined as phenomenological components, selectively determined, subjectively experienced, and objectively observed manifestations of maladaptation. The desire for dominance is not most sensitive to the impact of the world picture. The picture of the world are more determinant of maladaptation in the group of maladapted teenagers than with the adapted ones. In the group of well-adapted teenagers, the dependence of subjectively experienced adaptation and abnormal behavior on the image of I and the picture of the world is less pronounced and determined only by the reflexive and social components of the world picture. Thus, the results presented for discussion in general confirm our hypothesis. They supplement the existing ideas about the picture of the world is revealed in the works of Alekin, Bogdanovskaya, Korolova, Malkova. Just like these authors, we have the right to believe that the picture of the world is nothing but a semantic regulator of the teenager's behavior, and that the maladapted forms of behavior will be an attempt to cope with a difficult life situation, eventually expressing one's own self in a changing world. However, recently the conditions of personality formation and development have changed, which leads to transformation of the world picture, which provokes maladaptation. The study also obtained results that expand the modern concepts of self-awareness of adolescence. We are talking about the lack of unified system of self-image among the maladapted teenagers. The result can be explained from the point of view of psychotherapeutic concept of David C. Laney, according to which a child in a difficult life situation has a disorder of the united system of I image. The results we obtain cannot be regarded as final in solving the problems of adolescent maladaptation. The prospects of the study are related to a study of maladaptation in adolescence by gender, development of levels of behavior deviations that allow reliable differentiation of the degree of maladaptation, development of a correction program aimed at developing the image of the self in the picture of the world. Based on this research, conclusions were made, which are shown in the thesis on page 146. Let me read them out. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Liliya Sergeevna, for your presentation. Dear Council members, do you have any questions to the applicant regarding her presentation, outlining the key points of her study and the contents of her study, and then answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Anastasia Vladimirovna, please. Liliya Sergeevna, could you please tell us? I have an impression that provisions suggested for protection are the provision looks slightly different. No, you are wrong. So maybe I received a different version of your thesis. The only thing, the slides may appear in the wrong order. That is true. Provision 3 here or in the thesis. Provision 3, image of the world as a system of could you please go to the slide? Here we go. The order in my presentation is different from the order the provisions were listed in the thesis. Thank you, dear colleagues. Svetlana Nikolaevna, I also have a question, maybe about the agreement of your presentation and your thesis. In your thesis, you used regression analysis, which you never mentioned in your presentation. Could you please explain why you avoided the results? Maybe they are not significant enough, dear Svetlana Nikolaevna. The results of regression analysis reflect the last proposition, maladaptation in the groups of maladapted and well-adapted adolescents based on regression analysis and the indicators we took into account based on the factor analysis and regression analysis. Then please let me ask that this is a generalized model which takes into account, this is not a regression analysis model, that is why we have no coefficients here. So this is an attempt to integrate the results of factor analysis and regression analysis. Am I right? Yes, you are right. This is a generalized model, and in my work in the last but one chapter, where we have given regression coefficient, we have no negative coefficients. So components are given in a very generalized form, and someone who is familiar with regression analysis, it's hard to believe that all the coefficients are positive. I understand this is a generalized model which you allowed as an interpretation scheme to submit for our discussion. And speaking of components, here only components that were significant for the regression analysis. If we look at well-adapted teenagers, phenomenological component has no impact on the sense of adaptation and behavior. So then, so you started going into details. So here I drew your attention not to the errors but to the phenomenological component, which in your case is complex and consists of several components. May I ask a question? Please, Ludmila Vladimirovna. I have a question. I have two questions. Maybe a little difficult. First, you said that some kids are maladapted and have been taken to the police. Have you analyzed the reason for being registered by the police? Yes or no? No. We have not analyzed the reason for having a police record. Then my next question, according to the current rules, smoking is a manifestation of maladaptation, and transgenderness is a sense of is no longer a sense of maladaptation. I understand they were young kids, but what do you think about this? I missed your question. Today, smoking is interpreted as maladaptation, and being transgender is no longer considered maladaptation. What do you think to the situation that transgender issue may occur among adolescents? Have you? No, I have not considered that in our sample. We never came across such cases, but when I started work in 2014, and now I'm working with adolescents, and yes, this issue we are facing. I wouldn't say it is very common, but this issue is now relevant. So mostly you rely on your practical experience, and at that time, among all the teenagers, this issue was irrelevant. And my final question. You have many figures, but in your presentation you showed us some yellow squares and circles. What do they mean? Here they are. In all the figures we identify the most integrated indicators in the picture of the world of maladapted. There are three indicators: the environment, nature, and interaction. And in all the figures, in all the schemes, we identified the most integrated indicators. We highlighted with yellow color. So these are schemes. What? Yes. I am satisfied. Thank you, Ludmila Vladimirovna. Yuri Timofeyevich, do you have any questions to the applicant? Yuri Timofeyevich, I think has no questions. It's good that you have shown us this slide. Dear colleagues, we have a technical issue, so let me call a very short technical break till connection is restored. Thank you.
Людмила Владимировна, вы нас слышите? Можно вас попросить?
Людmila Vladimirovna, can you hear us?
Да, Людмила Владимировна, да.
Vladimirovna, please get back to your computer. We can continue. The technical break is over, and let us resume our session. Let's continue. It's good that we can see this slide, the world picture of maladapted adolescents. You explained it quite well in your presentation. Can you identify the main differences in the eye image of maladapted and well-adapted adolescents? Dear Oksana Vladimirovna, do you mean not the image of the world, but the image of self? In your presentation, you said you study the image of self of adolescents. So, what are your key findings? The image of self we have studied as the image of I, as the reflexive component in the picture of the world. Both maladapted and well-adapted adolescents they described themselves with the same characteristics, and the main difference is that the maladapted teenagers, let me show you, don't have a universal integration system of integration of the I image. They don't perceive themselves as a separate, as a set of characteristics in this slide. That's how they perceive themselves. And indicators 32, these are manifestations of one's self in various activities. So the characteristics, how they describe themselves, they are not connected. And in well-adapted adolescents, the system includes indicator number 29. So the common integration system is absent. Could you please tell us what maladapted adolescents think about themselves? Please give us some characteristics. So if we look at this slide, so first, it's important, what I forgot to mention, they are egocentric. They think very well about themselves. Average level of reflection. They are less aware of themselves in comparison with the well-adapted adolescents. They consider themselves to be good, attractive, important. And how are they different from proactive adolescents? They they have more adequate image. Well-adapted adolescents have a universal system, and maladapted adolescents they overestimate themselves. If we talk about differences, thank you. So the image is closer to reality, to what they can, what they are doing. They have a more reasonable, a more realistic image of themselves. May I also ask a question? Your question interested me. Let me ask Liliya Sergeevna, what do you think? Do you think we are talking about adequate or inadequate image of one's self, or some kind of defense mechanism? Because as I understood, they describe themselves. So that is a kind of declaration to the society, because they took you to be a representative of the society. So maybe this indicates they being closed and telling you, and maladapted adolescents, they don't need to protect themselves like this. Dear Svetlana Nikolaevna, I agree with you. We also found that maladapted adolescents, they are not open to the world. They are quite closed, and if we so they always get negative feedback from the world at school, since they perform badly. They find themselves in rehab centers, so they get lots of negative feedback. So the high self-esteem can be, they are taken to the police also. So they are trying to tell us we are good, judging by your presentation. Dear colleagues, do we have more questions to the applicant, or we can move on to the next part of our session? Let us hear the reviews of the members of the Decision Council with their assessment of the thesis, and then we will proceed to the applicant's answers. And also we may receive external reviews. As I was informed, we received no external reviews, so we may proceed to speeches to the of members of the Decision Council, since all the reviews have been published at the university website. I suggest, dear colleagues, if you don't mind, just focus on the key points of your reviews, and if you have no objections, after all members of the Dissertation Council speak, please answer questions. No objections to this? No, thank you. So let us hear the reviews. Svetlana Nikolaevna, will you please start? Let me start. I always try to be brief, but I will do my best. Dear colleagues, I was favorably impressed by the thesis by Liliya Sergeevna, but when you come across works on maladaptation, the first idea is, oh my God, here we go again, because social significance of this issue always attracts attention of researchers from different spheres, psychologists, lawyers, economists, activists to these issues. But on the other hand, these are eternal issues. If we look at statistics, analysis of maladapted behavior of adolescents, Liliya Sergeevna gave us some criteria. We may see that the number of criminals is declining while the number of suicides is growing. So maybe the number of drug addicts is going down, but drug consumption, the age is decreasing. So the relevance of the theme is beyond any doubt, regardless of the number of works already published. And second important point, which demonstrates the benefits of this thesis for psychologists, for anyone working in this sphere, it's very important to understand the reasons of this maladapted behavior. And most often we see that most researchers consider deviant behavior with the social factors, social internal psychological factors are much more difficult to study. But obviously these factors are the main reasons for this phenomenon we are working on. And in addition to that, going inside this personality requires certain sensitivity good ethical standards. So it seems to me that you should be respected for taking up this task. In addition to what I have already mentioned about these internal factors, they have two complex phenomenon, image of I and image of the world, which complement each other and determine not only understanding the meaning of life, but understanding of one's self. What else would I like to focus on? Let us, I will follow the chairman's instructions. Is a good system of the systematic structure of the work, good literature overview. We may see interdisciplinary descriptions of maladaptation from point of medicine, deviant science, psychology, systematic system of indicators, conditions of upbringing, education, good description of external, internal factors, integration of I in the picture of the world. An important role belongs to the age analysis, such as reaching sexual maturity, which contribute to this phenomenon. In addition to that, the thesis, in my opinion, deserves attention. The author relies on adaptation potential of an individual. It's always very attractive to analyze criteria and indicators of maladaptation, but it's much more productive, and here I agree with the author, to rely on adaptation, because what is important to us is how to help this young man or woman to get adapted, to let them function normally. And the adaptation potential is, as the way it is described, is an advantage of the work, and analyzing the image of I and orientation of personality. That is a complex phenomenon which describes this issue fairly well. The author chose the structural functional approach, which is her right, and I think this choice is quite well justified in this case. As we could see from the presentation, the phenomenon is described as a system of several components, and each component has a function, and that is why in this case everything is fairly transparent. Validity. I shall not describe the structure of the thesis because it is traditional, and speaking of validity of results, the results appear valid. It came as a nice surprise to read about see an explanation of the choice of methods, which is a rare case in psychological studies. Not every researcher can in detail and with good arguments explain why and how and what he or she studies. So this demonstrates the author's position, the author's opinion. The author suggested a hypothetical model of how the image of the world and through empirical methods explores it. In that sense, the empirical part and the theoretical part are very well structured and do not contradict each other. Groups for the study appear reasonable. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how groups were formed. So here participants put into groups according to clear principles. The study procedure, the study methods are clearly described. The author also conducted a pilot study, which was preparation for the main study, and novelty, scientific novelty. For the first time, the author described the contents of the image of the world of maladapted adolescents in the internal structural and functional approach on the basis of image of self and image of the world. The author explained the systematic factors of young men, reflexive activity. To me, it seems to be an important factor to understand what role reflection plays in how reflection affects adaptation. The author explained the phenomenological aspect and proved that the phenomenological component describes perception of the world of maladapted adolescents, value, scientific. Here I identified 3 points. The first point is connected with development of a hypothetical model of the impact of the image of the world on adaptation. It certainly contributes ideas of correction psychology on deviant behavior of young men and their image of the world. The second thing I really liked is the generalizing research of the studies of deviant behavior that will be useful to researchers in this field. For example, by sphere, by researchers, and by methods that one can use. You have worked hard. It's a good job. And third point is developing technology for complex assessment of this adaptive behavior of young men. The author used 3 methods, such as questionnaire, map, and expert evaluation on the basis of conversation with an educator. The data was then analyzed with the help of factor analysis, structured, tested for validity, and in the end a comprehensive tool was obtained that can be used to study maladaptation. Yet, like any work where the author is really involved and touches upon different spheres of study, despite these advantages, I have some questions and critical remarks. First, the theoretical significance explains the result of an empirical study. I'd like to know how the author explains her contribution to correction psychology. Second, the thesis in detail analyzes the image of I and mentions, for example, on page 48, the I concept. In other parts, they are used as synonyms. It would be good to know if the author chose the image of I, not the I concept, and if the author thinks the two structures are identical. The main part of the study of the world, image of the world, conducted on a small sample, 120 persons, 50 maladapted adolescents and 70 well-adapted. It is not clear why the author could not use groups of the same size, maybe reduce the number of well-adapted adolescents, and how this imbalance was taken into account when processing results. The phrase is not clear. The same relation of complete and incomplete of adolescents living in complete and incomplete families. judging by the table describing the demographic, only 17 people, which is 34%, come of complete families in the group of maladapted adolescents, and 33 are live in incomplete families. In a group of well-adapted, 2/3 are girls, while in the maladapted group, the ratio of number of men and women is practically the same. How were these factors taken into consideration when describing the results? Fourth, I have some doubt about the description of empirical data. I used the scientific culture of description. Most results are shown, these are average with standard deviation. There is no information about coefficients. We did not see them today either, about significance, coefficient correlation. And in annexes there is a table that there is no statistical data on the basis of which I could assess quality, validity of the factor analysis. Cluster analysis was used for discussion, but the results of cluster analysis itself, I mean statistical data, are missing, which can be used to prove its interpretation. So it's not clear how the people in cluster analysis were classified, or characteristics of the image of the world. It lacks cluster analysis statistics do not give an opportunity to assess its quality and conclusions on the difference between well-adapted and maladapted. The same is true about the regression analysis, the models and the without regression equations and coefficients, how each variable contributed. Without this information, the results cannot be. So mostly my results, most of my questions are about the quality of data processing. And in conclusion, the thesis by Rashitova, Liliya Sergeevna, on the theme, the image of I in the picture of the world of maladapted adolescent corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order of the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Rashitova Liliya Sergeevna deserves awarding degree of Candidate of Psychological Sciences, Specialty 190010, Correction Psychology, Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the applicant. Thank you. Thank you, Svetlana Nikolaevna. Now, as we agreed, let us proceed to the second review. Anastasia Vladimirovna, the floor is yours. After the review of Svetlana Nikolaevna, it's very hard to add, so I will not repeat. I fully support the previous review, and in continuation, let me ask what is the author's opinion on her contribution into correction psychology. I also asked myself this question in addition to what Svetlana Nikolaevna just said. What contribution into the correction psychology this work makes? Frankly speaking, at first I couldn't find an answer to this question. Then I found an answer for myself, but it will be interesting for me to hear what Liliya Sergeevna thinks. As we all know, when you talk about correction psychology, you always expect to hear about this ontogenesis. And when we look at psychological characteristics of adolescence with this ontogenesis, we understand that this is one of the common prerequisites for maladaptation. Double load, especially on adolescents with these ontogenesis. Gurtova Zhukova described that This idea tells us that in adolescent years, among young men with dysontogenesis, they are psychological, but the common age peculiarities or trends of maladaptation and good adaptation, and because of that, the study of general age trends is very important for correction psychology, because then this information can be used to adjusted to group of young men with dysontogenesis, and it seems to me that because of that, this makes the work really interesting, and the amount of empirical work performed by the author, as for me, as someone working with young people in difficult life situations, I know what it takes to talk to these teenagers, to get them involved, and the contribution of the author, the personal involvement and the contribution to correction psychology, I think it's obvious. Not to repeat what was already said by Svetlana Nikolaevna, I'd like to draw attention maybe to some points which made me think, or for what you usually call critical remarks and comments. You said you are studying laws of determination of maladaptation so you're looking for universal criteria, but using the criteria for your sample criteria in your sample were very different, such as smoking, police records. So these are very different criteria, and I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, for different adolescents in your sample, the relation of this criteria was different. So in the same sample, we are dealing with a heterogeneous group of adolescents. In your classifications of maladaptation, you showed yourself that, and because of that, I have a question. It is not clear if, from your opinion, can we use your data to all population of maladapted teenagers, or specific criteria can make critical changes? This is my first question. My second question is in the impact of the image of the world and how it impacts the adolescent behavior. The image includes 4 components, and among these components you have phenomenological, reflexive, social, and personal. And when I read that, it seems that you think that the phenomenological, reflexive, and social components of the image of the world, they have some other nature rather than personal, while in your presentation you just said that the image of the world is regulates the behavior of. So then why is the sense so how what is the relation between these ideas? And then I have some comments which maybe do not require, so these are just comments, so something that can be improved. Page 1 of chapter 1, where the author provides a very detailed, a very brief overview of these ontogenesis. I think this was an attempt to answer Svetlana Nikolaevna's question, but I think this was less productive. Otherwise, why corrections and psychologists need to know this, but we hope to hear your opinion later today. I disagree with image of the world, model of the world, scheme of reality, cognitive map. I'm quoting the thesis, page 39, where the author says that these are synonyms. I disagree. I think the work would benefit if you demonstrated specific features of the phenomenon under study, because I have big question, for example, how the image of I corresponds to the image of the world. So this would help to structure the material in a more logical way, but specific features of the I image. And the question I have already asked in the beginning, provision 3 of your thesis is not logical. There are contains grammatical and lexical mistakes. But apart from that, the impression of your work is, I think that it corresponds to the requirements. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that the thesis by Liliya Sergeevna Rashitova on the theme image of I in the picture of the world of maladapted adolescent corresponds to the basic requirements set on the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg University. And Liliya Sergeevna deserves awarding degree of Candidate of Psychology, Specialty 190010, Correction Psychology. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the applicant. Thank you, Anastasia Vladimirovna, for your in-depth review. Yuri Timofeyevich, can you hear us? Can you present your review? Dear Chairman, dear members of the Council, let me briefly inform you of the main points of my review. Relevance of the theme, sensitivity of adolescence to social impact can have different consequences, especially in behavior. As in some cases, sensitivity is not conflictogenic, and then adolescents can timely agree with the challenges of the world, and in other cases, especially in hard life situations, the world is this big conflict, and to respond these contradictions, adolescents may the relevance of the work. The author explains on the basis of hypothetical assumption that the study of image of I and the image of the world can help to overcome maladaptation and develop useful behavior skills. The purpose of the study is to study structural components of the image of I and the image of the world of maladapted adolescents to obtain opportunity to understand successful construction of psycho-correction measures that would provide conflict-free integration of maladapted adolescents, comparing the image of the world of maladapted and well-adapted adolescents. The author managed to identify the main indicators of maladaptation, and mostly she has reached this goal. Validity of scientific provisions. The author uses methods appropriate for the tasks and goal of the study of experimental material. Novelty, theoretical and practical significance, scientific novelty. The author, for the first time, used population of teenagers, maladapted teenagers, to study specific features of image of I and image of the world, which are typical features of maladapted behavior. identified regularities of subjective and objectively manifested signs of maladaptations, such as being aggressive, deviant behavior. The author compared empirical material and identified common features of which is a significant contribution in understanding the mechanism of interaction of biological and social phenomena. Theoretical significance, the author for connected of specific features of maladapted behavior to study images of teenagers, of their personality and real opportunities of successful interaction and behavior stereotypes. The author identifies important regularity. Adolescents overestimate the socially approved qualities as to overcome such disbalance. Practical significance of the work, its conclusions can be used by psychologists and educators working with maladapted adolescents to harmonize their world image of the world and let them interact better with the world. The structure and completeness. The thesis, the structure is traditional, contains the necessary chapters. I will not list these chapters. The analysis is objective and subjective indicators of maladaptation on the basis of qualitative and quantitative analysis shown in graphs and tables. Groups of experimental groups several groups took part in the study, and in general in the work the author obtained new results summarized in conclusions and provisions. The thesis is a complete study. I have no critical comments that would affect the overall impression. Regardless, the overall positive impression, I have the whole question. Page 9, the author says impact of components of the image of the world on this maladapted behavior. The question, how did you measure how they pronounced these factors were, with obvious signs of maladaptation. On page 146, the author says that dependence between image of the world is more pronounced than in maladapted adolescents. How can you explain this regularity? Why you never suggested some recommendations for prevention of maladaptation? Of course, practical significance of the work would increase because of that. Of course, we can plan in the future to publication of some manual, but I hope the author will answer. As for conclusion, by relevance and amount of work performed and significance of data obtained with the modern research technology and analysis, validity, and Liliya Sergeevna Rashitova, her thesis, Image of I in the Picture of the World of Maladapted Adolescent, corresponds to the requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees, and the degree applicant Rashitova Liliya Sergeevna deserves to be awarded the desired degree of Candidate of Psychology, Specialty 190010, Correction Psychology. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the applicant. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri Timofeyevich. And Ludmila Vladimirovna, will you please present your review? Can you hear us? I switched the microphone. Sorry, I forgot. I can see Yuri Timofeyevich, but I cannot see the... Okay, now I can see you. Okay. It is very hard to talk about after such excellent reviews have been presented, but I have to perform my duty. I will not read my entire review. I will talk and then read the conclusions. I support that the image of the world without the I image is incomplete, and that's it should not be that way. And if we unite those independent indicators, the author obtained interesting information, interesting data, and I assume that it's for the first time I came across a work where all these points have been studied. The work is highly relevant in
они прогрессируют, и я не...
because maladaptation turned into a serious issue, and I absolutely agree that all maladapted should be analyzed for reasons. What are the main indicators of maladaptation? He was taken to the police because he was drinking beer in a park, or because he beat up his classmate. And in that sense, external factors and internal factors would be different. But I agree the work is relevant. Next. The image of I is quite well described, but what I wanted to say, in Belarus everything is much more structured. The number of tasks always corresponds to the number of chapters and provisions submitted for protection. This is the we call that the interrogation approach, and you have 5 tasks but only 3 provisions for defense, for protection. This is not criticism. The rules can be different. Chapter 2 in our practice, usually paragraph 2.1, organization and methods, was turned into a separate chapter. Professor Kostromina said she liked this chapter. She explained the selection of methods. I absolutely agree with that, but I have a number of want some clarifications. It seems that chapter 2 shouldn't explain all the methods. You could put them into an annex, but validity of methods developed by the author, she should have explained. This is my personal opinion, because jumping ahead, I lack among annexes matrices of correction, which Professor Kostromina already mentioned. I look at this picture, are these pleiads or schemes? I was told that these are schemes. Okay, then I will not, but I want to understand what are the relations, on what level, and what is related to what, and how is this related to that, and why not otherwise. The author, I could not see the systematic factor. I looked very carefully. Hopefully the author will answer this question. Speaking about novelty. Where is novelty? Speaking of novelty, I liked the analysis of image of the world as a multi dimensional psychological structure consists of phenomenological, personal, reflexive, and social components. The differences between maladapted and well-adapted adolescents. So it would be interesting to see plaids or graphs. Figures with bar graphs is very obvious, but scheme of these connections is very unclear. So then why was it given at all? It would be interesting to see these differences presented in a more coherent manner. The specific features of integration of I in the image of the world, this is already not bad for a candidate's thesis. Speaking of practical significance, I expected to see chapter 3 on some correction experiment. So I expected the author to develop a method that will be implemented to change the behavior of maladapted adolescents. This never happened. Maybe this can be a forecast for the future, and we will get another experiment or maybe another thesis of the author, of the same author. Then that will be work for the practical novelty. The author created an instrument that can identify internal and external factors for maladaptation, and that is a good tool for candidate's thesis. As for validity, I have no comments, but since there are no metrics, it's I cannot say if the results are valid or not. Next, what is missing? Izmanovskaya in the literature overview. Two more names are missing from the list of literature. As I given the names in my review, I was surprised by great number of typos, but apart from that, I can say that my remarks are points for discussion, and if necessary, I think I can read them. But so in general, I'd like to say to conclude that the thesis by Rashitova and Sergeevna on the theme image of I and the picture of the world is an independent scientific paper which has practical and theoretical significance, corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant deserves awarding degree of candidate of psychology, specialty 190010, correction psychology. Article 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you for your attention. We thank you, Ludmila Vladimirovna. Let me very briefly present my review. Speaking of validity of results, I'd like to say that methods discussed today are based on demonstration of multidimensional phenomenon, and there is this validity of these modified methods, and it's good that the author conducted a pilot study with the population 177 teenagers. Novelty of the study is original, dynamic peculiarities of image of the world and behavior of maladapted adolescent prevents changes of the I image, and with the help of this work we can see the role of reflection in the adolescent behavior. The author also suggested empirically validated structure, and the image of the world is a system of images about the world. One's self is described is well described as a reflexive, phenomenological, personal, and social components. From the scientific point, it's important that the author contributes to understanding of interpersonal factors of maladaptation, which is important for theory of. In addition to that, the author describes a structure of the image of the world, image of I, their orientation to integration of maladapted behavior, and it's good that maladaptation is considered as a multidimensional and contradicting phenomenon formed under the influence of the image of I and image of the world of teenagers. The theoretical significance, these components, the phenomenological, reflexive and social unity of these components, and according to Liliya Sergeevna, reflexive component is activity, perspective, identification and other characteristics which included in the life of adolescence. Phenomenological component includes events, phenomena, and is equally important for natural, scientific, technical. The personal component includes significant for teenagers images of themselves, of reality, and the social component integrates in the work various needs and types of interaction of adolescents. So the author conducted impressive work, maybe and some analysis is missing, or maybe the right focus, but this is the first work, for the first serious work of the author, and she can certainly continue. Significance of each of the components changes depending on behavior according to the author, and while in the image of the world of maladapted material values in the group of proactive understanding of one's self and image of oneself prevail. Well, practical value, the structure of the thesis, let me skip. I can only join what has already been said. Now, questions and remarks. Questions. So first, question 2. Results demonstrate proximity, subjective indicators of maladaptation in teenagers in 2 groups of subjects. So it will be interesting to see validity of these criteria and generalizing results. The author describes contradictions of this maladaptation phenomena and questions. First question: you used adolescents in difficult life situations, which Anastasia Vladimirovna works on. So what social and psychological meaning this description has? Second, the number of generalized features of antisocial self-identification. How can a psychologist identify this feature, and can the results be used to find an efficient form of prevention? This is something my colleagues wanted to see. A chapter on this that would increase the practical significance as a program. And you do have any experience? Have you ever applied your results to practical work? The image of I in the picture of world of Maldives is a complete scientific world, contains important conclusions and results. The thesis corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Rashitova deserves awarding degree of candidate of psychology, specialty 190010, correction psychology. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the degree applicant, Liliya Sergeevna, and let her answer questions and comments of the members of the Dissertation Council. Dear Svetlana Nikolaevna, I would like to thank you for and let me answer your questions and comments. The contribution of our thesis to the theoretical development of correction psychology is in expanding understanding of the phenomenon of maladaptation and its manifestations. As a result of the research, maladaptation can be considered a multidimensional phenomenon reflecting the mismatch between a subjective sense of adaptation and outwardly manifested maladapted behavior in the form of substandard actions, antisocial self-identification, aggression, and delinquency. It's also important that internal factors of maladaptation are the image of the self and the picture of the world. Svetlana Nikolaevna, we accept your observation that the approaches to understanding the phenomenon of self-concept and the image of the self, of the I, are not sufficiently distinguished. The terms both the image of I and I concept are used, but as we consider the image approach is used by national psychologists Yegorova, Manerov, Grigorieva, Blokina. In our study, the I concept was not fully considered due to its multidimensionality and complex organization. We consider the image of I as the most significant characteristic for adolescence. One of the comments concerns these appropriate groups in the study, a smaller sample of maladapted adolescents. It's primarily related to instability of their residence in the social rehab center. Therefore, it was not always possible to complete a survey we started. Besides, adolescents were not interested in working with psychologists, and some of them ignored the psychodiagnostic process that had started as considered when using Mann-Whitney criterion for unrelated samples. I agree with your observation on page 64. In our description, we meant only full and single-parent families, and unfortunately did not address the issue of custody, which is reflected in our description. Unfortunately, in our study, the gender characteristics of adolescents were not taken into account as a factor of maladaptation. As observations and practical experience have shown, there are no significant gender difference in behavior of adapted boys and girls. We would like to resolve this issue with future research. Dear Svetlana Nikolaevna, thank you for your special attention to a presentation of empirical data, and let me comment on your comments. For all indicators of the picture of the world, the image of I, a group of well-adapted and maladapted teenagers were compared. Statistically, significant differences between groups are shown in bold in Appendix 5. The level of significance of these differences is also shown. Correlation pliers are not shown in the appendix because of the large volume, but in each figure shows level of significance of the correlations. We accept your comments about the lack of information on the results of factor analysis, and we shall consider this in the future. I also accept your comment about the insufficient description of cluster analysis. The results were not included in the work due to the large volume, and Annex 6 describes the content of clusters. In the cluster analysis, we classified characteristics of picture of the world, the image of I, separately by methods 20 statements of cell relations by Kuhn, Mark Parkland, My World, What Is It, drawn appreciative test by subject. Since there's a large number of indicators in each method, we accept a comment of a sufficient description of regression analysis in the annexes. Nevertheless, in subsection 3.4, the role of image of self and the picture of the world, we given coefficient of determination which reflects proportion of impact of picture of the world on maladaptation. Next, let me continue. Should I continue? I will answer. Yes, we decided that you should answer all the questions, and then we will ask council members if they are satisfied with your answers and comments. Thank you. Dear Anastasia Vladimirovna, I thank you for your interest and penetration into its essence. first question relates to universality of reflexive and semantic determination. Although maladaptation is included in the structure of all types of forms of this ontogenesis, we cannot talk about universality or reflexive and semantic universality. At this stage, we can only identify common features of reflexive and semantic determination only in two groups of maladapted teenagers: those who have preserved intellect and those who have been adapted. They describe themselves with identical characteristics, but with different severity and different structure. The same question is also related to correlation between results obtained and the levels and types of maladaptation. Indeed, there are studies in correction psychology that present different levels and types of maladaptation. They are difficult to differentiate due to the blurred criteria of maladaptation and therefore are used as synonymous. In our study, we considered social and psychological maladaptation as a whole, which reflected the real status of adolescence. Dear Anastasia Vladimirovna, answering your second question, we admit that every component of the world picture we studied has a personal and conceptual nature. However, the phenomenological, reflexive and social components, except for the meaning content, have a specific orientation which was emphasized in the work. For example, the social component reflects the need in interaction, while the personal conceptual component reflects the personal meaning of the world as a whole. Responding to your comments about redundancy of description of the phenomena of this ontogenesis, let us know that section 1.1 focuses on the proof that maladaptation is characteristic of different types of this ontogenesis and has common and specific features. That we took into account the position of Simaga. Without disclosing general concepts, it was difficult to determine the determinants of maladaptation, which allowed us to explore the world picture. We also agree with you that each concept used to describe a picture of the world, for example, the image of the world, reality scheme, cognitive map, has its own specifics. Although there is a convergence of these concepts, for example, in the approach of Chuyesheva. We agree with the comment on stylistic inaccuracy. Of course, we mean that the picture of the world of well-adapted teenagers, the greatest importance is played by technique as an element of phenomenological component. Dear Yuri Timofeyevich, I am very grateful for your attitude and comments which can positively influence my further development. Let me answer your questions. The first question concerns indicators of the world picture, the most significant of which are as follows. On the basis of regression analysis, we can argue that aggression as an indicator of a social component of the picture of the world, the value of the self as a stable world as part of the personal and sensory component, increases the aggressiveness of maladapted teenagers. The social identity as an indicator of reflexive component and syncretism in perceiving the world as part of personality and meaning component influence the social self-indication of these adapted teenagers. The second question refers to the dependence of behavior. Their lesser dependence may be related to peculiarities of interaction with the world. According to our data, well-adapted teenagers are open to the world. They are receptive to all kinds of information, are able to listen to other people's opinions, and that may stop them from behaving inappropriately. In contrast, the maladapted teenagers are less open to the world and have to be guided primarily by their own eye, their own strengths and ideas about reality around them. Dear Yuri Timofeyevich, the third question concerns the development of methodological recommendations. It should be noted that implementation of the prevention program requires considerable time and effort. Difficulties arise due to a lack of motivation to change their behavior and to develop educational activities in maladapted adolescents. They may be aggressive towards adults, including psychologists. However, such work has already begun. The program to develop the image of myself and the picture of the world maladapted teenagers is in the testing stage. 2 master classes were held as part of the National Scientific Practical Conference. 1 master class using masks to work with the image of the self of maladapted adolescents, and the second one using talisman-like objects to adapt children and adolescents to new microsocial conditions. The masterclasses aroused interest among teachers and psychologists who work with maladapted teenagers. In the future, we plan to publish a methodological manual and a program for working with adolescents with behavioral disorders. Dear Lyudmila Vladimirovna, I express my sincere gratitude for your interest in my work. Let me answer some of them. First question concerns the development of methodological. Professor Matasov had a similar question. Should I repeat my answer? That's okay. I got you. Thank you. In the future, you will address this. Thank you. The second question was about the role of responsibility in personal subjectivity. Dear Lyudmila Vladimirovna, we fully agree with you that responsibility is an important characteristic of subjectivity. In this study, we didn't focus on responsibility, since the real behavior of maladapted teenagers demonstrates low level of it. Some of the comments relate to formalizing the results of statistical processing. Let us explain that Figure 10 reflects the structure of image of self-adapted teenagers in the form of two pleiads. Let me demonstrate them. I asked, is it pleiads or schemes? I beg your pardon. This is schemes, which we interpreted as an absence of a single self-image. Let me find it. Hold on. I found the picture. There's two schemes, which we interpreted as the absence of a single self-image. It's not possible to display all correlation coefficients. It was impossible to present the correlation in full due to large amount. And in the text of the thesis, we showed the level of significance of these relations. In addition, there was a question about similarity of factor structures in the group of well-adapted and maladapted adolescents. Indeed, the factors are similar in content, but they are significant in each group, judging by the dispersion, turned out to be different, which affected the sequence of their appearance in the factor structure. In addition, it should be noted that the proof of validity and reliability of the author's methods is given in appendices 1 and 3. The following observation is related to by bibliographic reference, page 69. By Pravnik. The author modified the technique 20 self-relationship by Kuhn and McParland. In the study, we used the technique of Pravnik, and in this regard, we refer only to him. The methods refer to methods on page 72. Dear Lyudmila, I'm very grateful to your attentive attitude to our work and agree with all the comments about typos. From now on, I will try to be more attentive to the text, and special thanks for additional recommended literature. Dear Oksana Vladimirovna, I sincerely thank you for your attentive attitude to my work. Your comments will be taken into account in the future. Please allow me to comment on them. A comment on reliability of differentiation of group of adolescents in the thesis. Yes, indeed, we didn't use discriminant analysis. The differentiation of group was not only based on the analysis of individual profile of dissertation, we took into account observations of adolescent behavior, formal and informal conversations, and the very fact of being in a rehab center. Children with a difficult life status lived there, where the adaptation was most often observed. Conflicting phenomenon of maladaptation is expressed in the discrepancy between subjectively experienced sense of adaptation and outwardly manifested maladapted behavior in the form of substandard actions, antisocial self-identification, aggression, and delinquency. It should be noted that the maladapted manifestations are also found in the group of adapted teenagers. That means any teenager can show maladaptation in his particular situation. Accordingly, it's important to take into account the content of manifestation of signs, their frequency and duration when attributing a difficult life situation. According to the federal laws, a situation which objectively violates the vital functions of a citizen and is characterized by a number of signs: orphanhood, neglect, poverty, lack of certain place of residence, conflicts, and abuse in the family. In the personal files of inmates of social rehab center, social status indicated the social status. Most children are brought to such centers when they have misadapted behavior at school and parents experience difficulties in upbringing. Adolescents are referred to centers by guardianship authorities as well as upon application from parents. Next, concern the possibility of identifying social identity, as social identity implies that teenagers are involved in informal groups as well as unauthorized living home. At the time of the empirical study, there were several extremist informal groups in St. Petersburg. Participation in a particular group was marked by teenagers' appearance and the use of certain vocabulary. In particular, they wore clothes with St. Petersburg shield and right bank symbols. As for the policy of informal groups implies violent actions against persons coming from neighboring countries, it was possible to observe participation of teenagers in fights. The results of the thesis served as a basis to start developing a prevention program. The main emphasis in the program was on forming the image of I image. Thank you to Yuri, and I have already answered Yuri Timofeyevich. Are you done? Are you through? Dear colleagues, Dissertation Council members, are you satisfied with Liliya Sergeevna's answers? Yes? Yes? Thank you. And also, now we have the opportunity to give the floor to any attendees. Is anyone willing, is anyone present here willing to speak? No one is willing to speak at this point. Thank you. Then, during the discussion, by way of feedback, during this session of the Dissertation Council, questions could be sent. Have we received any questions? No, we received no questions. Then let us give the floor to the academic advisor, Posukova Svetlana Timofeyevna. Dear Svetlana Timofeyevna, please tell us about the degree applicant and her work. Dear council members, dear, my special respects to colleagues working in the remote access mode. I'm very grateful to Ludmila Vladimirovna for taking part in this discussion, and to Yuri Timofeyevich, as deserves special thanks, because we have to ask him for assistance quite often. But speaking of Liliya Sergeevna, it's very easy. Though she's young and fragile, she is very professional, an expert, a mature expert who managed with ease to overcome certain barriers and get involved in working with a difficult group of teenagers. And using her charm, Liliya Sergeevna managed to conduct this study. As a researcher, Liliya Sergeevna has great potential. She reacts to inaccuracies, to contradictions. She is tolerant to uncertainty, scientific uncertainty, because solution is not always, and she's very, she patiently looks for a way out, and I think this is a good potential for a researcher. And if we talk about personal peculiarities, an amazing feature of Liliya Sergeevna is that she is extremely well organized. She always meets deadlines. She values her time, the time of her academic advisor, and speaking at various youth events about research, she openly spoke about methods. She was a good expert on statistics, and I'd like to wish Liliya good luck. I would like to wish Liliya not to preserve her interest to this field where she has already reached good results. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, Svetlana Timofeyevna. Since our session is conducted, some members are present in the remote access mode. Do council members and others present, or maybe the degree applicant herself, have any unanswered or questions connected with working in the remote access mode? Are there any questions? Do we have any questions, unanswered questions? Then, if there are no questions, we may take a technical break to discuss the results. If we don't need to any discussions, we may proceed straight to voting. What do you think, dear colleagues? I think we don't need. Shall we vote by raising our hands? I put the question of awarding to Rashitova the degree of candidate of psychology, specialty 190010 correction psychology, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Decision Council shall be on awarding academic degrees shall be considered positive if at least if more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the Council present at the session voted for it, according to Article 23 of the Order. Council member Kostromina Svetlana Nikolaevna, your opinion? I support and I vote for awarding the degree. Council member Matasov Yuri Timofeyevich, I support and I vote for. Council member Miklayeva Anastasia Vladimirovna, I support the work and I vote for. Council member Marishuk Ludmila Vladimirovna, yes, I enjoyed the answers, and I see we are dealing with a mature researcher, so I support the work and I vote for. Thank you. And me, chairman of the Council, Shirinska Oksana Vladimirovna, also support this work together with my colleagues, and I vote for. Thus, let me proceed to counting the votes. And out of 5 members of the Council present at the session, 5 voted for, voted against 0, and abstained 0. Now all Council members voted for. The decision to award to Rashitova Liliya Sergeevna the degree of candidate of psychology, specialty 190010 correction psychology, has been made. Dear colleagues, since our session some participants are working in the remote access mode, do the Council members or the applicant and others present have any questions, comments on the procedure of the meeting? No, there are no questions and no comments. Then, Liliya Sergeevna, let me give the floor to you for your closing remarks. I would like to thank all dear Oksana Vladimirovna. I would like to thank all members of the Dissertation Council for attentive attitude to my work, for valuable comments that I will take into consideration in the future. I would like to thank Konovalova Natalia Leonidovna because she gave me lots of support when I became a doctoral student, and she helped me with the theme of my study. And I would like to thank my academic advisor Posokova Svetlana Timofeyevna for her hard work, without where this work would be impossible. It took 6 years of hard work. We thought of thinking it over, and since I'm sincerely grateful to all of you and to the organization where your thesis was written, our St. Petersburg University. Am I right? Yes. Let us congratulate the applicant, and let me declare the session closed. I thank everybody for participation. Please stop the online broadcasting. Thank you.